He already knows the list by rhythm, the rustle of paper, the way a name looks next to a number. The stack in front of him is a small city, departments and families and months of rent, reduced to columns. Outside the glass, the city breathes and sleeps. Inside his office, the night is a vacuum. Henrique's hand hovers over a pen that looks like an accusation. He has memorized details he never meant to learn. Badge numbers, birthdays, the quiet way one woman folds her scarf when nervous. He has not, until tonight, memorized how to breathe. The fluorescent lamp throws a pool of harsh light across the desk, and the rest of the room is a slow gathering of shadows. A tie is loose at his neck, loosened more as if by habit than by comfort. On his father's old watch, the minute hand keeps moving while he stays suspended. He keeps returning to a single sentence his father used to say when deadlines or arguments rattled him. "We do what has to be done." Tonight, the sentence tastes of paper dust. There is a key in the lock. The corridor light clicks, the distant flap of a janitor's cart. Footsteps, then a soft knock at the glass. Henrique looks up before he realizes why listening has become urgent. The door opens and a woman steps in, carrying a woven bag and a tolerance that looks like worn leather. She is small enough to be overlooked, yet she is not invisible. Fine dust clings to the hem of her coat. Her hands are busy with 3 scarves, a pacifier, and a small backpack that contains the concentrated noise of someone else's life. She ushers 3 small bodies behind her like a human tide pulling back from the rocks. They are the same in ways that make his eyes pull in. 3 chins with the same dimple, 3 tufts of hair, 3 blue shirts with mismatched socks. They keep to her skirts, tight as if the world were a stranger. They look at Henrique with the sort of reserve toddlers have for strangers who smell faintly of other houses. He watches them do what children do when the air is uncertain. They measure a face, they count the familiar from the edges. One puts a thumb in his mouth and watches the pen on the desk as if it were a small son. The other closes his eyes, learning how to be still. The third, Pedrino, though he won't be called that aloud tonight, tilts his head the way a leaf tilts toward rain. The woman, Clarice, does not expect any ceremony. Her voice is low, practical. "Sorry to bother, sir. I need to get in. The kids they fell asleep in the lobby and the guard said someone here might know." She curtails herself, because she does not want to be an accusation. She begins to lower the backpack as if it contains a single fragile rule. We respect other people's spaces. Henrique feels that rule inside him and finds it loosening. He has the names and the numbers and the power to rearrange lives with strokes of an instrument that used to be called a pen and now feels more like a verdict. He doesn't know what to do with the presence of 3 sleeping bodies in his building. The spreadsheet has no category for the tender. One of the triplets shifts and a tiny hand brushes the desk, misses the pen, and finds Henrique's wrist instead. The touch is feather light, accidental, then not. Fingers seeking something to anchor to. The child's palm is warm, a small thing with the insistence of truth. He looks up at Henrique with a face that has observed too much and understood too little. "Uncle sad," the child says, as if explaining weather. It is a childish phrase, the grammar slips. It is also an arrow. The words arrange themselves inside Henrique like a map he refuses to read. He has been walking in fog. 3 little hands remove the fog. The smallest of them buries his face briefly in Henrique's shirt collar and, without ceremony, breathes in the odor of a life he had been isolating for months. The other 2 maintain their vigilance, leaning to see if this man will allow them the small importunities children always take for granted. A hand, a chin to count, a laugh that makes the sound of the world less enormous. Henrique's first movement is awkward because he is unused to being owned by anything except duty. He sets the pen down with deliberate slowness, an action that feels obscene given the numbers on the page. He is more used to hands that sign or point than to hands that trust. Clarice watches. There is a calculation in her eyes, a quick, practical rhythm. Is this a man who will shoo them away? Who will lock the door and toss their small bodies back into a night that vibrates with dangers? Or is he the kind of person who will, possibly, let them be safe for an hour? She does not let herself hope. Hope is expensive. "You can sit," Henrique says, quieter than the hum of the building, as if he is offering them a seat rather than a favor. "It's late. You shouldn't be out." Clarice's mouth shapes a thank you that is almost a question. The tiny hand is still on Henrique's wrist. So small, the veins in his arm become a landscape she might write home about. For a moment, his office is full of the small sounds of child life. A zipper complaint, a soft murmur, the steady breath of sleep. He watches one of them, Paulinho perhaps, reach for the corner of a yellow legal pad and poke it like it might be a secret. He lets the child have it. The pad becomes a world. The child draws a line with a blunt finger and looks at it like it has answered him. There is a rustle behind Clarice. A security guard clears his throat and keeps his distance, the way a witness keeps distance. The guard's eyes slide from the children to the papers and rest briefly on Henrique's jaw, which has an unfamiliar stillness. "Are you alone?" Clarice asks then, and it is a housekeeping of words. She is asking him the question everyone asks in their private inventories at 2 a.m. He is alone, she means. Is this place safe for them to be? Henrique might have said no. He might have pointed to the list, to the names that stand like a ledger of choices made. He might have told her that lives are, after all, collateral to survival. Instead, he scoops one child up, an impulse he cannot explain, and places him gently on his lap. The child settles there and exudes an authority that belongs to no adult. "That's my niece." The security guard's misstep is easy in a city that recasts people to suit its convenience. Clarice corrects him with a tight smile. "These are mine." There is nothing in her tone that pleads. She speaks with the kind of steady dignity mothers acquire when they must be both fortress and field. Henrique sets another hand on the desk. The pen looks smaller now, almost petty next to the weight of this moment. He closes his eyes for a second that stretches like a rubber band, and feels a tilt that starts not in his head but in his chest. One of those little mechanical movements that made men of his family take orders from their hearts, even when their heads were busy with balance sheets. "What are your names?" he asks, because a man who had been counting names for business now asks for names for reason that has nothing to do with lists. "Pedrinho, Paulinho, Serginho," Clarice says. She says them like a prayer and a report. The names are trifurcated mirrors, each one a small echo. The children answer with a chorus that is more about the sound than the meaning, syllables and small smiles. One of the toddlers strokes Henrique's hand as if learning it is a place. The world has trained them to avoid much of what is outside home, to recoil from the non-family adult with a kind of practiced caution. The Triplets' avoidance is a survival song. Tonight it changes its tune. Henrique is aware then of the list again, the people on it, the faces, the collateral. He could continue, finish the document, and press his signature like a stamp that sends ripples through apartments and buses and grocery lists. Or he could do something else that he cannot yet name and that terrifies him precisely because it might be consequence-rich. "Do you have a place to go?" he asks Clarice, suddenly feeling foolish for asking such a private question. She does not flinch at the question. "My brother lives near the station. He helps when he can. But there are days when I need to stay late. The nursery closes and—" she searches for the right neutral word, "and sometimes the lobby is safer than the street." Henrique sees how every sentence is a balancing act. Clarice's economy of speech is a map of restraint. She gives what she must and holds back everything else. He admires that, in a way that surprises him. He is used to people who lard their sentences with justification or with guilt. Clarice keeps a pocket of facts. Inside the office, the clock scratches forward. Henrique slides the top file closed, not because he is finished with it, but because it is possible to place one book down at a time. He knows the tactical cost of the choice he is about to make. He also knows that the night has unmade one of his defenses. "You shouldn't keep them in the lobby," he says. His voice is lower now, tempered by a decision he is only partly willing to own. "If you can come by during the day, there's an empty room on the 3rd floor. We have a caretaker who stays until 8. I can arrange for someone to keep an eye on them." And he hesitates, measuring the risk and the propriety. He has to be careful about the way this will read in the halls of power. He is not offering charity as a spectacle. He is offering a practical solution. Clarice's skepticism is quick and visible. Doubt is an instant bruise on her features. "I don't ask for favors, sir. I just—" Her hands smooth a crease in her coat. She is asking, but what she really wants is the right to keep her work and keep her kids. It is a modest claim in a world that measures worth in margins. Henrique hears the modesty and calls it by its proper name: dignity. The word makes him angry at himself for having ever seen options as a trade of dignity. His father's voice again: "We do what has to be done." But now the sentence is not an edict. It is a question about what has to be done. "I can offer you a daytime position," he says, blunt and awkward. "We're short-handed in administration for the next quarter. You would be an assistant, nothing fancy. I'll write it up." Clarice blinks. It is not a question she expected to be answered this way. She has had interviews where people asked stupid questions. She has had employers who used kindness as leverage. Suspicion unfurls like a banner. "Why me?" she asks. And the question is direct and fair. "You 3 hands," he says. The answer is childish in its honesty. They came in and sat down like they belonged here. He smiles then, a small, crooked thing that surprises him as much as it surprises her. "And you were standing there with more fatigue than a ledger could explain." Clarice is careful. She asks about wages, hours, whether there will be contract and benefits. Henrique answers with the kind of specificity that has been trained into him by years of meetings. A salary range, a 2-month probation, an afternoon schedule that allows school pickup. He knows he can justify the details in a memo. He knows that offering stability is not heroic. It is merely the right arithmetic arranged differently. There is an awkwardness in making a life-changing offer across a desk at midnight. The building seemed to lean closer to listen. Clarice folds her hands and considers the pragmatic consequences. If she takes the job, she can afford a daytime nursery, some days, and she can stop carrying the small lives with her at night. She can buy a pair of shoes that will not leak in the rain. She can, possibly, sleep without one ear listening for footsteps. And she can also be used. That thought sits beside the practical ones and watches them. The world teaches mothers to trade pieces of themselves for stability. Clarice will not surrender more than she chooses. "All right," she says finally, "I'll come in, but I am not looking for favors. I work." Henrique writes something on the pad with a still hand, an email address, a starting date. He signs nothing yet. Signatures at midnight are dangerous instruments. He taps his watch. The minute hand is still impartial. He offers her a card and says, with the kind of clarity that is both professional and oddly personal, "Bring them tomorrow. We'll prepare a room." She nods, accepting the card as if it is a small promise. The triplets yawn in chorus, suddenly exhausted by the long day and by the weight of adult decisions. There is a softness to the end of the encounter. The night is less sharp than it was when he first entered the office. He feels, for the first time in months, not relief but a curious loosening. He returns to his files and sits down again, pen poised as though the instrument were some boundary he must cross slowly. He makes a note, a name not on the list of terminations, but a new entry in a harder ledger. Decisions made in favor of the people who work here. The pen scratches differently now. It is the sound of a man trying, at the perimeter of corporate calculation, to remember the cost that does not show on a spreadsheet. If this moment speaks to you, stay with us. After she leaves, Clarice walks into the night with the small knot of sleeping bodies and the other knot of fragile hope. The city is nearly impossible to read. It offers warmth and cold in the same breath. She keeps hold of the children's hands, as if a single misstep could send them tumbling into a life she has spent years keeping steady. On the bus to the neighborhood where João waits with a pot of stew and a watchful look, Clarice thinks about what assistant might mean. She has cleaned offices for years. She knows the architecture of a building better than its occupants. She knows which pens disappear into drawers and which plants die from neglect. She knows how the air smells when executives design layoffs. Yet she has never been asked to participate in decision-making. The idea is at once dizzying and terrifying. Her brother, João, is waiting on the bench outside a narrow apartment building. He has the look of someone who has measured disappointment and still shows up. He is a useful, stubborn man with a capacity for solutions. "How did it go?" he asks, as if taking inventory. Clarice hands him the card and watches how his face folds into thought. "A job," she says. And because she trusts her brother's practical mind, she begins to say the things she had left unsaid in the office. The hours, the concern about childcare, the small fear that the offer is kindness posing as leverage. João listens and nods as he has always done, then says bluntly, "We get die. But if this is real, if the man's for real, we help you move through it." He never romanticizes. That is his survival trick. Clarice smiles because she knows she will have to take help as she can give it. The children will, for the first time in months, be moving into a new rhythm. They will have people's faces who are not strangers in their periphery. They will be introduced to a room with toys and a nap schedule, a rule map of lightness, paint before tears, song before sleep. They will still be wary of bodies that smell like other houses. They will test trust as a practice, not as a one-night discovery. Henrique does not sleep well the night after the meeting. He walks the apartment his father once kept in the center of the city and lays his hand on the same banister that feels unchanged by grief. The photographs on the wall, an ordered line of generations who believed in stoicism, look at him with the patience and accusation of ancestors. He is not performing courage, he is practicing it. He calls his CFO in the morning not to announce a miracle, but to ask a question he had not thought to ask in years. Can the company reallocate house cleaning of the executive floor to a local contractor and shift the saved budget into a small childcare fund? The answer is not immediate. Corporate logic is stubborn. It asks for spreadsheets and projections. Henrique presents them. He calls a meeting with legal to draft a formal job offer, with clear contract terms and an explicit salary and benefits line. He does not want anything rumored. He wants facts. Word moves through the building in staccato whispers. Vanessa, the senior manager, who keeps the rumor mill in her pocket like a playing card, raises an eyebrow and says things to people in the hall that have the texture of skepticism. Regina, who works in HR and has an easier face for change, hears the plan and nods before smiling slowly. People begin to position themselves as allies or doubters. The company is, in small increments, learning the choreography of this new decision. Clarice spends the next day doing what millions of women do. She prepares for a work she has not yet done. She irons a blouse she can afford and lays out shoes that do not squeak. João helps the triplets take baths and chooses 3 different pairs of socks, because children who are about to enter an office need small ordinariness to anchor them. Night falls again, and Clarice sits at the kitchen table nursing a cup of tea and rehearsing for conversations about forms and names and times. She is not naive about the way office life will go. She only knows that if people will pay her to show up and do the work she has always done without a claim, it will change the way she uses her minutes. The morning of her first day, the sun scrapes the city clean. The commute is a small ritual. Bus to metro, then a quarter of a mile walking past pastry shops and men who read newspapers with their noses in them. It is ordinary in the way the traditions are. It is a string of rehearsed gestures that makes life manageable. The elevator doors open into the building, and Clarice takes a breath that is part prayer, part logistics. She holds Pedrinho's hand and the hand of another child, while the third clutches João's coat as he walks them to the lobby. They step into the marble air, and Clarice feels, for the first time in a long time, that her life is not entirely at the mercy of the weather. When they arrive at Henrique's floor, there is a brief moment of suspended reality, as if someone has pressed pause. The office staff looks up from their computers and takes them in. A woman who comes from a neighborhood the city forgets, carrying children who are the same and different and full of quiet gravity. Nobody applauds. People do not clap in workplaces for the things of ordinary bravery. But there is curiosity, and curiosity is the first stage of attention. Regina greets them at the door with coffee and the kind of smile that tries to be neutral but is slightly scandalized at being asked to participate in life beyond HR manuals. Patricia, the woman who will be a daytime helper for the childcare room, kneels and offers a toy and a tiny introduction in the secret language of caretakers. The triplets watch from Clarice's skirts as if the whole interchange is a new species of weather. They avoid the hands of the others, cataloging them silently. Henrique arrives then, tie loosened, in a way that looks deliberate now, no longer the accidental looseness of a man falling apart, but the intentional signal of someone choosing not to armor every tendon. He has brought a bag of small things children like: colored pencils, stickers with animals, a soft book. It's carefully chosen and practical. It is not meant to buy affection, but to recognize it. There is a small, awkward ceremony at the door where paperwork is exchanged, and 2 signatures are placed, not on any monumental contract, but on a simple form that will write Clarice into the system. It is a tangible gesture. She will have an employee number now, a direct deposit, a line in a spreadsheet that says she is part of the enterprise's human body. As she signs, hands a little shaky, one of the children, Serginho, reaches up and presses his finger into Henrique's hand. The gesture is simple, trust spoken in a touch. It undoes several centuries of corporate rhetoric at once. They begin that first morning with small, necessary ministrations. Nap mats are spread. A poster of the alphabet is tacked crookedly on the wall, and a bowl of reheated soup is set out for Clarice's lunch. She learns where the supply closet keys are, and what the photocopier eats when you put the wrong paper in. She learns to set an out of office that does not feel like a confession. Henrique watches quietly, more director than distant patron. He lets her find her rhythm, stepping in with the practicalities he can promise, a schedule that accommodates school pickups and the formalities of payroll he has arranged himself to ensure nothing looks preferential in a way that will get them all burned. At midday, someone in the mailroom sends a message to the group chat. There is talk on the floor about what the boss is doing. It comes with a side of gossip and a side of admiration. The two never cleanly separate. But inside the childcare room, it is quieter. The triplets inch closer to the new routine. They still flinch at unfamiliar voices, but they begin to learn the different timbres of kindness. Back in his office, Henrique begins the slow work of translating impulse into policy. He does not sign sweeping decrees. He drafts memos, sets up meetings with the finance team, and proposes adjustments that have the weight of numbers behind them. Reallocations, a small employee assistance fund, modest profit-sharing plans that will take months to feed expecting households. He cuts his own disposable spending line and reallocates it toward the fund, an act neither dramatic nor entirely painless. He knows the optics will be debated over coffee for weeks, that people will call him naive and reckless. He makes the calculation anyway. By the end of the week, small successes stitch themselves into a pattern. Clarice receives her first payroll deposit in an account under her name and keeps the notification like a small secular sacrament. She buys 3 pairs of shoes that do not leak. She takes the children to a restaurant they have never entered, and for the first time in their small lives, they try a taste of something that is not reheated at a neighbor's kitchen. They do not know how to appreciate that dinner the way adults do. They simply sit and ask for more bread with the same solemnity men bring to prayers. Henrique is watching these changes not from the balcony of some paternal triumph, but from the thin edge of caution. He watches his colleagues' faces, Vanessa's narrowed chin, the way some people begin to call him by his first name in the hall, testing familiarity. He knows the rumor mill is a machine that eats goodwill and grinds it into gossip. He also knows that decisions made quietly and with clarity can outlast the chatter. At night, he reads the lists again, but with different eyes. He keeps a small column for contingency plans that will protect those he can. The numbers still insist on their logic. There are obligations to shareholders and debts that have to be serviced. He is not a saint. He is a man pivoting inch by inch from the mechanical reasoning of corporate survival toward the messy arithmetic of human stewardship. And Clarice is learning that office work is not the same as cleaning floors. Paper is not dirt. People will speak to her as a colleague rather than as someone whose hands are perpetually skin-deep in other people's detritus. It does not change the fact that she sleeps to the soft chorus of trains in the neighborhood. It does not erase the nights when she must be both nurse and accountant. But it changes the equation enough that mornings get a little less brittle. There are missteps, a mislabeled file that makes an accountant sour for a whole day, a misunderstanding at the cafe where Henrique forgets and orders one less sandwich, a rumor Vanessa spreads that Clarice was hired without protocol. Each minor episode is a test of the sturdier architecture they are trying to build. Will the company protect a plan that costs the comfortable something? Will people see Clarice not as a charity case, but as an employee? Henrique answers the test in a meeting he calls the following Tuesday. People come in with their mental shields strapped on. He presents the figures with his pen steadier than it has been in months. A small reallocation of budget. A projected increase in productivity from better staffed teams and less turnover. The human cost of resignations as a metric. He does not make this about his choices. He frames it about the company's long-term viability. You either measure people as cost, he says plainly, or you invest in them as a resource. The difference is how you count. I propose we count differently. Voices rise, some in support, some lukewarm. Vanessa protests in a way that sounds like policy-mailed indignation. Others, like Regina, quietly record the minutes and look at the chart with the patient hope that some things are about to shift. It is not an elegant victory. There are no banners. But there is conversation where before there was only the finality of decisions. While all this is happening, the triplets, still cautious and not given to public displays of affection, begin in small increments to choose Henrique. It is never theatrical. It is a reach for his hand when a door is heavy, a leg that threads between his knees when he sits for a quiet moment, a piece of paper pressed into his palm with scribbles they call art. The office watchman jokes once that Henrique is now their uncle, and the nickname sticks, half joke, half omen. One evening, weeks into their new routine, Henrique sits by the window of the childcare room at the edge of nap time. He watches the light flatten onto tiny shoes and folded arms. He thinks of his father's last week, when apologies were made between meals and nothing was repaired completely. He thinks of the list and the way paper can become a kind of erasure. He thinks of the children, 3 small anchors that make the tides of his grief less solitary. Serginho climbs into his lap without ceremony and presses his forehead to Henrique's chest. The contact is small and whole. Henrique knows then that his life has been altered not by numbers, by 3 small bodies who are willing to trust him on a bad night. The changes he insists on making will not be quick. Contracts must be redrawn, numbers reconciled, stakeholders convinced. There will be resignations among those who prefer the old arithmetic. There will be nights when the office is emptier and the pain of those he could not save will be near. But the room with the children will remain, a small refuge amid a larger machine. And somewhere between the pile of papers and the softness of a child's hand, Henrique learns that responsibility can be practiced as generosity. It is not a relinquishing of duty, it is an expansion of it. The day before Clarice's first full week is over, João comes by with a small shop-bought cake and a ridiculous, hopeful grin. He sits with them in the playroom and watches as the triplets show him the stickers Henrique has brought, the way children show the world a treasure chest by naming it. He speaks with Clarice in the hush between laughter and nap, and she tells him about the way the office smells like books and new coffee, about the small bureaucratic victories, about the way men in suits can be awkward with a baby on their lap. João does not romanticize. He says, "You watch that they don't get used, okay? You keep your head." Clarice nods because she is already doing that. She is keeping her head on a pivot she can manage. She is learning to meet help without letting go of the reins. Her life is not suddenly whole. There are nights she still wakes because the city sounds like it is opening old wounds. But she finds herself less alone in the mathematically precise, unsentimental ways of the world. The children are sleeping in the bed the company bought as part of the room's equipment, and Henrique has, without drama, begun to drop by at 5 o'clock sometimes to take one child for a walk when Clarice's shift overlaps. That gesture alone reframes a whole number of small choices. One man changing his schedule so the life of another woman becomes less precarious. One night, after a particularly long day of meetings designed to entrench the small personnel changes into policy, Henrique sits alone at his desk and opens a drawer. He finds, beneath old envelopes and a pen that no longer writes, a photograph of his father when he was young, standing in front of a factory, cap in hand, the future very broad and the present loud with possibility. Grief does not leave him, it rewires him. He thinks of the man in the photo and of his own culpability, and finds a strange orchard-like peace blossom, that he can choose to plant fruit in ground his father would have cared about. The week ends not with a flourish, but with the ordinary domesticity of 5 small bodies leaving an office together. Clarice with 2 bundled children, João with the 3rd under his arm, Henrique carrying a backpack with leftover sandwiches because someone forgot to pick theirs up. They step into the city, which applauds them with nothing but its indifferent air. The photograph of a chosen family is small, imperfect, and honest. The loosened tie in Henrique's hand, the small shoes of the triplets, Clarice's steady gait. It is a quiet tableau of people learning to be for each other. Behind them, the office's light goes out for the night, and Henrique stays a moment longer to arrange the papers in a way that makes sense to him. He puts the list of terminations in a separate folder and relabels it. It will not vanish from the world, but neither will it be the only thing that defines them. There are meetings to come, rows of spreadsheets to confront, and the inevitable chapters where good intentions will meet cold realities. There are also small rituals, bedtime songs hummed in stairwells, stickers traded like currency, that make the work feel human. As Clarice turns the key to the apartment she shares with Joao, the children trailing like small planets in a new orbit, she thinks of the span between the night at Henrique's desk and the humble cake Joao brought. She allows herself one small satisfaction. She has, finally, taken a step that might make their mornings less dangerous, their nights less thin. It is not an ending. It is a beginning that must be forged day by day. The true tests are still ahead. The boardroom debates, the legal forms, the days when the company's profit graphs will speak louder than nursery rhyme detours. But for now, the five of them, Henrique, Clarice, Pedrinho, Paulinho, Serginho, have found a way to be a kind of small, accidental family. And in the hush of their shared walks home, the city seems to listen a fraction more attentively. The weeks that follow scatter themselves into a rhythm of small, stubborn miracles and hard arithmetic. Memos are written, then rewritten. Legal draws borders that take the shape of forms and clauses. Finance redraws columns and asks for projections that must be honest and unromantic. Henrique learns to translate urgency into procedure. He drafts a list of concrete moves and reads them aloud in his head until the words lose their novelty and become work. Shift budget from discretionary events to an employee assistance fund. Formalize childcare spaces and staff. Institute modest profit sharing that will begin as a 3-month pilot. Temporarily reduce his own bonus line and increase the fund's seed. He writes each item with a pen that once felt like indictment, and now starts to feel like a tool. Not everyone is persuaded. Vanessa keeps the rumor mill fed with the kind of sharp sentences that look like principle and sound like grievance. She questions the optics of a boss who brings children into work, even as she leaves early to a suburb with clean lawns and a babysitter who is never on the roster. Others quietly object to the reallocation of budgets. A handful of senior people, unused to such public acts of reprioritization, hand in resignations, letters signed with the clarity of those who prefer certainties to experiments. The company, in these weeks, is leaner in staff and thicker in conversation. At the same time, the small room on the 3rd floor fills in the way an emptied space takes on a life. Nap mats arrive in sensible colors. An orderly shelf of books is arranged by Patricia, whose hands understand how to arrange the world for small bodies. A cheap desktop radio plays children's songs quietly so no one who naps will be startled awake by corporate noise. Parents from other departments begin to approach, secretly at first, asking if their little ones might come when necessary. The pilot program, 3 months, a test of trust, becomes, in practice, a little network. It is not charity. It is a shift in policy that says the company will account for its people in more than spreadsheets. Clarice learns the office like someone learning a new language that has familiar vocabulary. The copy machine's tantrums become less mysterious once she knows the sound of the paper tray misaligned. She learns to format an internal memo and discovers that a sent email can be as potent as a cleared floor. She learns to read the calendar, to set meeting reminders that mean she will never forget a school pickup. Her hands, trained on floors and dust, now know the exact pressure to press to make the scanner wake. She finds pleasure in the little professional certainties, an inbox cleared, a file correctly labeled, and in the way a polite reply can redirect a day. There are moments of humiliation in the learning, small human things. She misfiles an expense report, and an accountant's sigh pins the moment into her memory. She forgets to staple a document, and the receptionist gives her a look that is equal parts annoyance and education. She brings the triplets one morning with mismatched socks because laundry in the neighborhood moves by a calendar all its own. A coworker whispers, and a laugh leaks from a nearby desk. Clarice feels the eyes and keeps walking. She knows the dignity of showing up after being seen. Joao keeps his practical distance, but he watches and helps. He brings them small items, a blanket that smells like home, a toy truck, and he sits in the playroom sometimes like an extra pair of hands. He asks questions that are blunt enough to be useful. This program will last? Clarice answers with a steady voice that has learned to keep the cautious optimism that keeps a household functioning. We'll see, she says. We make this last. Henrique's schedule shifts without much fanfare. He begins to leave the office earlier some afternoons to take one of the children for a walk. He drafts policy language in the morning and tests a problem with a toddler in the afternoon. The duality does not make him less credible. In fact, it makes him truer to the people who watch him and the numbers he must serve. He convenes a working group to monitor the fund and hires an external auditor to make sure the redistributions have traceable outcomes. He knows the optics are fragile. He wants to protect the plan by making it rigorous. Then the setback comes, small at first, then noisier. A long-negotiated vendor contract that the company had been counting on is delayed. The client, nervous because of a rumor that has been given wings by an ex-executive's resignation, asks for additional guarantees and threatens to postpone. The delay means cash flow tightens just as the pilot childcare fund ramps up. Payroll, which had seemed stable, looks suddenly more dependent on favorable invoices landing on time. Speculators at the coffee machines begin to stitch causality where none exists. Change happened. Change cost money. Someone needs to apologize. A favored night columnist writes a paragraph that reduces careful change to naivete. The board calls a meeting. Chairs scrape. The air tastes of printed agendas and terse emails. Henrique is asked, plainly and without flourish, to justify the moves. He does not flinch. He brings his spreadsheets, the projections, and the modest dashboards showing early retention gains among staff who now can balance childcare. He brings testimonials, quotes from parents who no longer had to choose between pay and a child's nap. He offers a roadmap to reduce discretionary spending and increase the fund's sustainability without payroll at risk. He offers, too, what is hardest for him, a reallocation of his own compensation for the next year, not as a symbolic gesture, but an actual line-item cut that frees up cash to see the pilot through a critical quarter. The board's reactions are mixed. Some are moved by the clarity, others by the risk. In the silence that follows, an old spreadsheet logic murmurs that this is generosity dressed in poor forecasting. Vanessas of the world sharpen objections into formal votes. In the end, a split board results in a tough compromise. The program continues, under stricter financial oversight, with Henrique's money seeding it and a requirement that milestones be met in 3 and 6 months. The public setback feels at once like vindication and vulnerability. Henrique walks through the corridor that evening with a weight he cannot wash off. He has chosen people over a formula that once guided him and, in doing so, has made himself accountable both to the people he hopes to protect and to the numbers he serves. He carries that accountability like an object in his hand, careful, heavy, and impossible to set down. It is on the day that marks his father's birthday, an anniversary that used to be a date like any other, now visited with a pressure he cannot avoid, that he unravels in a way that surprises him. He is alone in the childcare room in the late afternoon. The triplets are in a quiet hour of painting, and he watches their small gestures as if they are being made on him. A question he has held for months, the one about whether his choices honor his father's legacy, unspools into a jagged grief. He presses his face into his hands, and the air seems to thin. Clarice is there when he looks up, not because she had planned to be, but because credible compassion has a schedule all its own. She is sitting on a small stool, fingers curled around a mug that has lost its handle long ago. For a moment, they are both simply two people in a room with crayons. She does not reach for platitudes. Instead, she offers what she has always offered when the world becomes too sharp, a safe presence. "You cried," she says, simply as if announcing a weather change. The triplets continue to paint, unconcerned with the adult category names of sorrow. One of them, Pedrinho, stamps his finger into a pool of blue and looks up, sending a small, serious line across Henrique's sleeve. Henrique manages a laugh that is not quite a smile. He tells a story about his father, about a factory whistle, and a man who believed a ledger could explain the world. Clarice listens, and then, in the exact bluntness that made her survival possible, she asks, "Did your father ever like children?" Henrique is surprised. He confesses that his father had been stern but approving in private, that he once brought a young colleague home for stew and taught him to tie a knot. Clarice tells him, in return, about the morning she found the triplets' father gone, and the way an empty bed can change the way you measure days. The admission slides between them without scandal. It is not a revelation that demands pity. It is a fact that explains a part of a life. In that room, under posters of animals with mismatched eyes, something larger than policy begins to feel possible: reciprocity. They are no longer simply boss and employee. They are people who have seen one another's losses and discovered, in the seeing, a new kind of responsibility that does not erase agency. The months that follow bend toward endurance. The company's cash flow wobbles, then steadies as the delayed contract lands with a lesser margin than hoped, but enough to pay salaries. The pilot program meets its early markers. Fewer last-minute absences among certain teams, measurable increases in morale on internal surveys, small savings in overtime costs that used to spike when parents had to stretch their hours. The profit-sharing plan is modestly implemented, as a conditional bonus for the departments that hit agreed targets, not as charity but as a recalibration of incentives. Vanessa resigns in a final theatrical letter that quotes principles. The floor murmurs, and some applaud her steadiness. But other voices, steadier and less performative, remain. Regina takes on a new role as the liaison for the childcare program. She learns the names of the triplets and begins to bring them home-baked goods once a week, which Clarice accepts with a small, rueful gratitude. As Clarice settles into her tasks, she begins to take initiative. She proposes a small learning workshop for parents about budgeting time and files. She organizes a shared calendar that helps other employees tag their leaves for school recitals and doctor visits. The program becomes less a novelty and more a set of practices that quietly change how people plan their lives. Clarice's competence becomes visible in the practicalities. A supply list always up to date, a policy that everyone knows how to access. A straightforward note on the intranet about pickup times that saves managers hours of back-and-forth emails. The triplets, for their part, keep choosing Henrique. The attachment never becomes grand. It grows in gestures. A small hand that reaches out in a crowded corridor. A shoe left by his office door that he finds at the end of a long week. A piece of paper smudged with crayon that says, in the way small things can speak, TTO in clumsy letters. In the quiet of an ordinary afternoon, Serginho will curl against Henrique's knee and watch as the man unpacks decisions from his briefcase. The child will rest his head and look like someone who has found, for a while, a harbor. There are other tests. One office rumor suggests that the program is a way for Henrique to win favor with certain departments. Another suggests it is naive and will cost more than calculated. A misfiled expense, an honest mistake, becomes for a few days a wedge used to pry the new arrangements apart. Henrique responds the way he's learned, with calm documentation, a public note to staff about process improvements, and an invitation to dialogue. He makes no speeches about virtue. He shows the work required to keep a program functional and transparent. Time, merciless and steady, does what it does best. It reveals consequence. The company does not transform into a paragon overnight. Profit charts wobble and then begin a slow, small rise. Turnover decreases in departments where the program reduces parental absenteeism. People who once scoffed at the idea now use it, returning from maternity or paternity leave to find that their jobs did not vanish while they were caring. Clarice grows in her role. She is promoted from temporary assistant to permanent administrative coordinator for the program. The promotion is not theatrical. It is a formality signed at a desk with fewer witnesses than one might expect. But it changes her life. The salary becomes a steady presence in her bank account. The stability allows her to plan for the triplets' school fees and to buy a better winter coat. It allows João to sleep with fewer worries. Clarice uses the extra income not as a ticket to luxury, but as a scaffold for small, real improvements. A dentist appointment for one child, a decent pair of shoes that do not leak, a ticket to a small seaside town for a day that will feel to the children like festivity rather than travel. The small rituals that stitch the ordinary into meaning accumulate. There is a morning when Henrique loosens his tie in the lobby and the triplets run ahead, deciding which stickers they will put on their nap mats. There is an afternoon when Clarice and Henrique stand in front of an office window watching a rainstorm, talking about nothing and everything. There is a night, simple, not cinematic, when they cook scrambled eggs in Henrique's flat and the children sit on the counter, soporific from a long day, their feet dangling. Romance, if it is present, is an unlit ember, a subtle heat, not a bonfire. There are glances that hold a question. There are pauses in conversation that ask for permission. But both are careful not to rush the boundary separating gratitude from attachment. They are aware, as both employer and employee, of the fragile line that could be misread. They keep their promises by keeping things transparent. Conversations are documented when required, and personal favors are routed through HR when they are professional in nature. The story of their connection is one of companionship that grows from mutual respect rather than a scripted plot. Months lengthen into a season, and then into a year. The pilot program becomes a formal benefit on the company benefits page. Small teams adjust their expectations, and managers learn to plan around school calendars. The company is quieter in its staff exits and steadier in its quarterly reports. A modest profit-sharing scheme pays out a small bonus that is meaningful to the employees who receive it. Not a life-changing windfall, but a money that allows for repairs, a new pair of shoes, an overdue bill to be settled. The children flourish. They learn the contours of the office, the carpeted halls, the small kitchen with its station of coffee, and the library nook of office chairs. Like a map of a world that is both adult and child-friendly. They invent games that make sense out of conference calls and staplers. They know the precise angle at which Henrique will smile when paper is stacked rightly. They begin to call him, in a way that has become natural and not imposed, Ticcio. The name is tender, a small claim that carries no legal weight but that has the gravity of affection. One evening, near the anniversary of the night the triplets first walked into Henrique's office, the company celebrates a low-key milestone, the first year of the program. It is quiet, a simple staff meeting that ends with homemade cake that Regina made and brought. There are speeches that are short and practical, a note from finance about the fund's audited numbers, a line from HR about engagement scores, a quiet thanks from people whose lives felt less precarious through the year. Henrique, standing at the edge of the room, watches Clarice cut the cake, and the triplets hand out pieces. He thinks of the pen that used to look like indictment, and the way it now seems less sharp. Outside, the city is doing the work it always does, moving through rain, lights, the sound of late buses. Inside, the small family gathers. João has a day off and holds one child on his knee. Patricia smiles from the doorway with a look that has seen many children come and go and knows, without melodrama, when a bond will persist. Vanessa, now gone, is a memory of a threshold that had to be crossed. The company is still not perfect, but it is different. A year later, the final image is quieter than any grand finale could justify. It is ordinary and full. The five of them, Clarice, Pedrinho, Paulinho, Serginho, and Henrique, leave the office together. They do not stage it. There are backpacks and a small scuff in the toe of a shoe that Clarice has planned to repair. Henrique carries a tote with leftover sandwiches as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The tie he holds, slung over his shoulder, is not a symbol of defeat but of choice. Loosened by habit and by the decision he made that night when 3 hands found his wrist. They step into the city, and the air is ordinary. No one applauds. The scene is a modest photograph of people walking home. They cross the street, and a gust of wind lifts a poster and sends it fluttering like a small exclamation. The triplets laugh at the sound and sprint a few steps ahead to jump into puddles with a concentrated solemnness that makes adults smile. In the weeks, months, and years that follow, the work continues. The program scales slowly. Other companies learn from small case studies and emulate what they can. The company learns that the cost of people is not only in wages, but in the loyalty and stamina they produce when allowed to be whole. Clarice's life is steadier. She attends a parent-teacher meeting without rearranging the world. Zhuang sleeps better. Henrique keeps his calendar with more space for small, meaningful acts and fewer items that demand only financial answers. There are no miraculous changes. There are increments made by steady hands. When the inevitable hard choices appear, budgets to trim, times to negotiate, the language they have learned is different. They count not only heads, but also the small economies of care that keep households intact. They measure, sometimes clumsily, the unquantifiable returns of trust. On a regular Thursday evening, much like the one the story began on, but gentler, Clarice tucks the triplets into beds that smell faintly of the office blankets. She hums a song that she learned from her mother, assembled now with new verses about pens and priorities, about shoes that don't leak, and men who learn to listen. Henrique stands by the doorway like someone who recognizes the sacredness of ordinary rituals. He helps fold a small load of laundry with a deliberate awkwardness that the children find amusing. Before they go, Pedrinho presses a crayon-smeared note into Henrique's palm. "For Titio," he declares, solemnly, as if conferring a title. Henrique reads the scrawl, 3 loops that could be letters, and smiles as if a much larger world has agreed to something small and intimate. They leave that night as they left the office earlier, 5 people choosing to be a kind of family. It is not an erasure of past pain, nor a wholesale redemption that erases mistakes. It is, instead, a sequence of choices. Men who loosen ties rather than tighten them. Women who accept assistance without surrendering dignity. Children who learn to trust a stranger and, in doing so, teach adults how to feel less alone. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today.